Most arguments don't end. They pause. Someone gets tired. Someone walks away. The words stop, but the heat, doesn't it, just goes underground, waiting for the next moment when something small reopens it and the whole thing starts again. What if there was a different way to end it? Not by winning. Not by finding the perfect argument that shuts the other person down. Not by apologizing just to make the discomfort stop. By doing something that, in most Western communication culture, feels almost dangerous, going completely silent. There is a Japanese concept called Chinmoku. It translates roughly as silence, but that translation loses almost everything that matters about it. In English, silence is the absence of something. It's what happens when the sound stops. It's empty space, awkward space, space to be filled as quickly as possible. In Japanese culture, Chinmoku is not empty. It is full. It is a form of communication, a statement, a considered response. Sometimes the most powerful statement available, not because it withholds something, but because it offers something that words cannot space for the other person to hear themselves. Japan is what linguists call a high-context culture. Meaning is not carried only in words. It lives in pauses, in tone, in what is deliberately left unsaid. A person who speaks too quickly, too much, too loudly is seen not as confident, but as uncontrolled. Someone who can sit with discomfort without rushing to fill it signals something different: depth, restraint, the kind of inner steadiness that comes from not needing the last word. This is the tradition that Chinmoku comes from. And it shapes not just formal negotiations, but everyday conflict, how arguments are handled between colleagues, between couples, between strangers. There is a famous story passed around in Japanese business culture for decades about a negotiation between a Japanese company and an American firm. The Americans made their proposal. The Japanese delegation sat quietly for what felt to the Americans like an uncomfortably long time. The Americans, interpreting the silence as rejection or confusion, started talking. They began revising their own offer. They lowered their price. They added concessions. The Japanese had simply been thinking. The Americans had negotiated against themselves, filling a silence that needed no filling, because in their cultural framework, silence meant something had gone wrong. In the Japanese framework, it meant something was being taken seriously. What's happening in an argument neurologically is not a meeting of minds. When a conflict escalates, voices rising, words getting sharper, the brain's threat detection system takes over. The amygdala, which processes fear and danger, sends signals that effectively narrow thinking. Your field of attention shrinks. Nuance disappears. The other person stops being a complex human with reasons and history and starts being an obstacle. Psychologists call this amygdala hijack. And in this state, no argument you make will land. No logic reaches someone whose threat system is firing. The words go in, but they are processed as further threat, more ammunition, more evidence that they are under attack. This is why most arguments get worse the more words you add. Every counter-argument is, neurologically, another provocation. Every attempt to explain your position reads as an escalation. The content of what you're saying becomes almost irrelevant. What the other person's brain is tracking is your tone, your energy, your level of threat. Adding silence does something that adding words cannot. It removes the stimulus. And without a stimulus to react to, the threat system has nothing to escalate against. The Japanese practice of Chinmoku in difficult interactions is not passivity. This is the misunderstanding. Passivity is the absence of intention. Chinmoku is intentional. It is chosen. It is the decision to hold your position without defending it with words, which paradoxically is a much stronger position than defending it loudly. There is a principle in Japanese culture called ma, the meaningful space between things. Not just silence, but the particular quality of a pause that carries weight. A musician uses it between notes. A calligrapher uses it between strokes. In conversation, ma is the space that allows what was just said to actually land, to be heard rather than immediately countered. In an argument, the person who can hold that space, who can absorb an attack without immediately firing back, has in a real sense already won. Not won the argument, done something harder, won back their own state of mind. And their calm, their stillness, does something physical to the person across from them. Research on de-escalation confirms what Japanese culture embedded as practice. When one person in a conflict becomes noticeably quieter, not cold or punishing. But genuinely still, the other person's nervous system responds to that signal. Human nervous systems are extraordinarily sensitive to the state of other nervous systems around them. We have mirror neuron cells that fire in response to what we observe in others. When you observe someone calm, your own nervous system is pulled toward calm, almost involuntarily. This is why a genuinely quiet presence in an argument is not nothing. It is an active force. It is not the silence of someone who has given up or shut down. It is the silence of someone who has chosen not to add fuel to a fire. That difference is perceptible. The other person, somewhere beneath the heat of the moment, registers it. This doesn't mean it works immediately. In the first moments, silence sometimes provokes more escalation, because the other person interprets it as dismissal or contempt. This is the test. If you can hold the stillness through that initial reaction, without breaking into defensiveness or counterattack, the dynamic begins to shift. There is a secondary effect that almost no one talks about. When you go silent in an argument, genuinely silent, not storming off silent, not contemptuous silent, you give yourself back the resource that arguments consume most rapidly: clarity. When you are talking, you are committed to the position you just stated. You are now defending it. The act of speaking a thing makes it feel more fixed, more true, more worth fighting for than it might actually be. When you stop talking and simply observe, something becomes possible that wasn't available a moment ago. You can notice whether what you're arguing about actually matters, whether the position you are defending is really yours, or whether it's solidified in the heat of conflict. Whether the other person has a point you couldn't hear because you were already forming your counter-argument. The Japanese art of Chinmoku isn't just about managing the other person's nervous system. It's about managing your own thinking, recovering the capacity for perspective that conflict strips away. Here is what this looks like in practice. The next time you feel an argument escalating when the voice in your head is building its counter-argument, before the other person has even finished speaking, try this. Stop forming the counter-argument. Don't abandon your position. Just stop drafting the response. Let what's being said come in without immediately deflecting it. Breathe once deliberately, and don't speak until there is a genuine pause, not just the other person taking a breath, but a real opening in the conversation. Then when you do speak, speak at half your normal speed, not slowly enough to seem condescending, just enough that you have to actually think about each word before it arrives. The act of slowing your speech signals to your own nervous system and to the person across from you that you are no longer in threat response mode. You will feel the pull to fill the silence. Every instinct will tell you that the silence is dangerous, that you're losing ground, that you need to say something to hold your position. This is the feeling that Chinmoku is training you to sit with. Because in reality, silence in a conflict doesn't lose ground. It creates ground. It is the neutral territory that neither person occupies, and whoever can stay in it longest has the most access to clear thinking. You don't have to master Chinmoku all at once. Start with one argument, one moment where you choose to pause instead of immediately responding. Notice what happens in the room when you stop adding to the heat. Arguments cost more than most people account for. Not just the immediate discomfort, but the residue, the things said in heat that can't be unsaid, the subtle shift in how two people see each other after words were used as weapons, the slow erosion of trust that happens one escalated exchange at a time. What Chinmoku protects is not your position in the argument. It protects the relationship itself and your own sense of who you are inside a conflict. Because the person you are when you're winning, an argument is rarely the person you want to be, and the argument you won at full volume is rarely worth what it cost. Chinmoku is not weakness. It is the recognition that some things are worth more than winning the moment. The most powerful sentence in any argument is often the one you chose not to say. If this kind of practical wisdom, the kind embedded in Japanese culture for centuries, now confirmed by what we know about the brain, is something you want more of, follow for more. There's a lot here.